Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m. across all the platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Of course, we've been going since 9:45 on our First and 15 there at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. So for all of you who join us and are part of what we do here, we really appreciate that. Fun and busy show today. Former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, we're going to catch up with him before we're done today. Jake will share some thoughts on kind of where this Georgia team is right now on that mission to go for 2-22. And by the way, speaking of that, pretty big announcement to be made on today's show. We'll do that with you. Connor Riley comes by. Connor will have some thoughts on the CFP Top 25 that's re-released tonight, kind of those contenders for UGA that are starting to emerge. I want to break that down a little bit with Connor as much as we possibly can. There is potentially good news for Georgian recruiting. There is potentially, at least seemingly, bad news for Georgian recruiting. We'll also kind of deal with all that. And off the top, and this is one of those things, kind of like the old school FM radio, we're sort of request line here playing the hits. Somebody brought this up to me in one of our comment sections yesterday, and honestly, I'd kind of forgotten about this, but I'm glad it was mentioned to me. Back during the offseason, a Kentucky assistant coach gave some pretty good bulletin board material to Georgia. And around here, we keep receipts. Now, sometimes I have to be reminded to use those receipts because I'd totally forgotten about this. But nonetheless, let's do it today. Let's stir the pot here, and let's see if we can get it flaming going for the game on Saturday against Kentucky. What do you say we begin right there? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So around here, we try to sometimes be as honest as we possibly can. I mean, hopefully we're always honest as we possibly can, but there are some days in which more candor is required than others. This is kind of one of those days in which sometimes we just like stirring the pot. I mean, sometimes we just like, trying to sort of add a little spice into the gumbo. Because, let's face it is a long season, and there are some weeks in which the sell is pretty easy for the upcoming game. When you're playing, a top-ranked team in Athens, for instance, obviously you know what the stakes are. When you're going on the road with a chance to clinch the SEC East and punch your ticket for Atlanta, you know what the stakes are. And that's kind of what the story has been for Georgia the last couple of weeks. But here this particular Saturday, as you get ready to travel to Kentucky, where it's expected to be very cold once again, the stakes are a little more difficult to define. I mean, yes, we do genuinely believe that Georgia has a lot to gain by being 13-0, and even if you're going to be in the SEC championship game, and even if you're going to be a favorite in that SEC championship game, if you're 13-0, if you're obviously clearly the number one seed going into the college football playoff, you have a chance to play that game in Atlanta. You've heard me say this before, that a Peach Bowl semifinal game is far more advantageous to Georgia than a Fiesta Bowl in Arizona would be. The level of travel you'd have to endure to win the national championship is just kind of different kind of thing, that if you could play that semifinal game in your own backyard, of course you'd want to do that. But that's more of like a practical reality. But as human beings, we're not really logical creatures. We're more emotional creatures. And so if you really want to get fired up for a game, like, travel logistics is not the most potent force of motivation. I'll totally acknowledge that. That the better source of motivation for a game like this is something that sort of tugs on your emotions a little bit. So that's what we're going to do. And I have to admit something. I had totally forgotten about this. This was something we made a big deal about back in the summer because, we just kind of like having fun around here. And if somebody says something crazy, we're going to jump up and down and make a big deal about it. And somebody yesterday in one of our comment sections, and I wish I could give credit to the commenter who did this because I had actually forgotten about this. And this is almost like the old school FM radio request line type thing of, hey, we're playing the hits. Call us up and let us know what you want to hear. Well, somebody yesterday was like, BA, don't forget about what the Kentucky assistant coach said back during the summer. And the honest truth is I had forgotten about this. So here is our attempt, telegraphing our intentions here, to sort of stir the pot, sort of fan the flames, sort of create some bulletin board material. This is sort of classic podcast, streaming video type behavior here. We're going to pull a quote. We're going to make it a big deal about it as a way of kind of trying to sort of create the proper level of energy going to the game on Saturday. Vince Marrow, longtime Kentucky assistant, been with the program, I believe, since 2012, tight ends coach, recruiting coordinator. This is a guy that's been pretty closely tied there with Mark Stoops in Lexington. And back during the offseason, he made an appearance with, are you familiar with Kentucky Sports Radio? That's KSR, Matt Jones, a group of people there that kind of cover the team. And Marrow on the show back during the offseason was talking about the fact that they had the Georgia game circled. Now, first thing he says here is sort of fine, and then it kind of takes a little bit of a different kind of turn after that. So let me let you hear from the summer, first clip of Vince Marrow, Kentucky assistant coach. This isn't like, UK big guy, on message board. This is like a actual Kentucky assistant on an actual radio program. Here is Vince Marrow talking about Georgia from the summer. Take a listen to this.
You have said that in order for Kentucky to do what you want to do, the next step is beating Georgia. But what will it take for this program to take that next step to beat Georgia?
So, I don't know if you remember 18, we were not ready for that game when it was CBS.
And you could tell early. I mean, we fought hard, but you could tell it wasn't going to be there. Yeah. But
when we played them last year and went down there, I'm telling you, our guys went in. We were not, it was not, we really thought we would win that game. And
two plays go differently. You're in it. The drop that they kept showing on the draft coverage, right. and he's a great player, so I'm not crushing him at all. But that little screen pass to Rodriguez, Fortner missed a block on that, and if he had hit that block, Rodriguez was going to score.
But I don't think y'all remember, we had 3 field goals blocked. One deal drops the touchdown pass.
That's right. We did have 3 field goals.
And then we missed the field goal on that, and then we had 2 more field goals blocked. So we lost 30-17. I'm just telling you, if we picked that fumble up, the one they say was a fumble,
hurt, yes.
That's a different game because now they're only up by 3, and we going into halftime.
So let me ask you this. There were 93,000 people at that game. Of the Georgia fans who were there who are also listening right now, was there ever a moment during the 2021 Georgia-Kentucky game you're like, oh, my gosh, Georgia may lose this game? Did that ever happen? Now, he says, hey, we only lost 30-17. Actually, that's not true either. You lost 30-13. You had to score in the last play of the game to make it so. Like, have you ever, and this is, and I'm sure we've probably done something similar before. I mean, listen, we are not blameless when it comes to stuff like this, almost certainly. But have you ever heard a game in which Kentucky essentially got blown out and they were fighting and scratching and clawing to score a touchdown in the final play just to sort of preserve some face? Admittedly, they did cover the Vegas point spread late in that game. But have you ever heard a game oversold the way that Vince Marrow is with Matt Jones right there? 2 plays go differently. If we don't just have 3 field goals blocked, like, this gives you an idea of how dominant Georgia was against Kentucky last year. Who blocks 3 field goals? I don't even remember them doing that, but who does that? That sort of speaks to, like, the special teams. Like, Georgia puts good players on special teams for that particular reason. Like, that's not one of those things of, well, I mean, like you do control a certain aspect of your special teams performance, and obviously Georgia puts elite players on special teams for that very reason. National championship game was another example of that with Carter blocking the field goal attempt by Alabama there as well. Like, I've never heard such a rosy picture painted of a game in which Kentucky essentially got blown out, if not for a garbage time touchdown, to make the score seem even a little bit more appealing. And then Marrow takes the next step by exaggerating what the score actually was. Like, this is fan talk. And yet it's, credentialed media member talking to actual Kentucky assistant coach, but it might as well be to, people going back and forth on a message board in terms of, the level of sort of inflated fan talk, inflated belief about the game. But then it takes a little bit of a turn for the worse. And this is the thing that I think, if you're, a Georgia fan, you ought not forget this. If you're a Georgia fan, you ought to remember about what a Kentucky assistant coach was saying about this game that will be played on Saturday as recently as this offseason. Now, some of what he was predicting to be true has obviously going to turn out not to be true, but there's an aspect and an element of what he's saying that still might be true, so I think it still kind of works as potentially bulletin board material. Here is some very big talk from an actual Kentucky assistant about how it might play out on this particular Saturday. He said it in the summer, but the game's about to be played. That makes it relevant again. Here is Vince Marrow from KSR on Georgia, Kentucky.
We physically thought, and Kirby even said it, when they keep asking about all these media days, he said, they keep saying about Kentucky, he said, are you guys serious? He said, that's one of our toughest games every year. You talk to our players. So I think, again, going into this year, you take every game, but I think it's going to come down to that game. I think it's November 19th here or something like
Next
that.
to last game, yeah.
Yeah, I think I like when you got.
Do you like having it at the end of the year? It's the next to last game of the year.
It's going to be cold, probably.
Yeah.
It's going to be. Hey, Kroger Field will be rocking. It'll be cold. It'll be a good time to play some football.
All right, so the thing that he says that's obviously untrue is that somehow the season's going to come down to this Georgia-Kentucky game. The idea that that's the game everybody's got circled, Georgia versus Kentucky for the SEC East, the big step-up moment for Kentucky. We had that chance in 2018. We weren't ready for it, but now we are. It's all going to come down to this. Well, clearly that's not true. Kentucky's not good at all. But the part that Marrow says that could be true is it is going to be cold. In fact, it's going to be colder in Lexington on Saturday, I believe, than it was in Starkville this past weekend. So that's going to be true. Will, Kroger Field be rocking, as he says? I guess that remains to be seen. I'm not sure. Kentucky typically is a pretty good, pretty tough place to play, and usually Kentucky's not very good, so the team doesn't necessarily have to be good for the environment to be big. So from that standpoint, there's an element of what Marrow says there that might still be true, that it's going to be cold, that Kentucky's going to give Georgia its best shot, the fans are going to be rocking. But if you're a Georgia fan and you're kind of trying to find what your level of motivation is for Saturday, or maybe Georgia coaches and players, maybe they should be reminded of this as you're trying to figure out, hey, 11th game of the year, in-state rival next week, SEC championship after that. Clearly there are bigger things ahead for Georgia on its way to go for 2-22. This game would have the appearance of almost being a little nondescript. It's not for the division. It's not for really anything other than just preserving an undefeated record, but that's more about a practical reality than kind of an emotional thing. So how do you conjure up the emotion? Well, basically, the Kentucky assistant coach back during the summer called his shot and saying, loud crowd, cold weather, we're going to sneak up on Georgia, we're going to beat them because even Kirby Smart knows how physical we are. And if that doesn't get you fired up for the game, I guess I just don't know what will, because that's a guy right there who clearly thinks that Kentucky had something for Georgia, and Georgia has an opportunity on Saturday to prove to him how wrong he is. Now, some of what he said has already been either factually incorrect or predictions that turned out not to be true, but Georgia can put the final nail in all of that by absolutely just, walking over these Wildcats on Saturday. Now, it is fair to point out that some of the things that Marrow says that Kirby has said about Kentucky, Kirby was saying once again here this week at his Monday press conference yesterday, and the idea of Kentucky being a physical team, the idea of it being a tough place to play on the road, the idea that doesn't really change just because Kentucky suffered one of the most embarrassing losses any SEC team ever could the prior Saturday by losing to Vanderbilt. That doesn't really change the scenario all that much. So there is an element of what Marrow says that Kirby has said, that Kirby has now said again here this week. In fact, for additional context, let me let you hear Kirby from yesterday.
Tough place to play in the SEC, which they all are. This is one of the challenging ones. They got a great environment. Mark Stoops has done an incredible job there with the program, coming off a tough loss, against Vandy. And I know we'll get the response from them that you would expect out of a team that's the quality of Kentucky. They've done a tremendous job the last 2 or 3 years with what he's done with their program. He's built it through keeping players there, developing players, extremely physical and tough. When you ask our kids over the last 2 years what the most physical game they played in, to a man, almost every one of them talks about how physical the Kentucky game was 2 years ago up there, and then at our place last year, where they went on a 20-something play drive against our defense to end the game. And their defense is one of the tops in the conference year in, year out, but that way this year as well.
So, first of all, that's how a leader of men speaks. That's how a true leader of an organization should speak. He's measured, he's calm, he's under control. He doesn't say anything that he's later to regret. A stark contrast to some of the clips we heard there a moment ago, I would say. And there's an aspect of what being discussed here that is kind of true, that for some reason under Mark Stoops' leadership, Kentucky has been a tough team to play, especially for Georgia, almost regardless of what its record is. There's an element of just playing Kentucky that's not easy to do. They've been blown out a couple times this year. Tennessee blew them out a couple of weeks ago. But that doesn't necessarily give me reason to believe that Georgia's going to do the same thing, because from week to week, who knows kind of what team you get here, and Kentucky does bring a level of physicality to the table. But it's one thing for Kirby to say, hey, respect these guys because they're physical. And it's a far different thing for Kentucky to say, hey, you better respect us because we're going to be physical with you. Kirby doing that is an instruction. Kentucky saying that about itself is a challenge. So, Georgia, you've been challenged. Back during the summer, one of their own coaches said, you're going to come here, it's going to be cold, and we're going to physically whip you. It's going to be cold, it's going to be loud, and we're going to out-physical you in a game like this. My guess is that's the kind of challenge that Georgia typically responds pretty well to, and in this mission of go for 2 in 22 towards the ultimate goal of repeating his national championship, every step in that journey matters. Georgia taking another step with a road win on Saturday to complete its SEC slate. Who knows? Maybe a little bit of bulletin board material may be just what the program needs for the energy required to do what needs to be done on Saturday. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we're happy to have you with us no matter how you join us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Before that, 9:45, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. Lots of video ways for you to watch our show, whichever one you use. We're happy for that, or maybe you listen on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or maybe you're one of the many folks who have for a long time been checking out our show on podcast. The Apple Player, Spotify, world-famous DawgNation.com, pretty much every podcast platform you can find. We are on all of those, and we are Go for 2 in 22. Got the message right there on the desk. I got the Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt on here there as well. And, of course, we're happy to have our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia a part of that there as well. Engineered Solutions of Georgia is also kind of a version of Go for 2 with all of you there as well. They're the ones you go to if you're dealing with a couple of different issues around your house. One of those might be waterproofing issues. It was raining today as I was coming in, and for many of you, rain is a source of anxiety because you know it's going to be creeping into your garage, sneaking into your crawl space, flooding your basement. You know that that's an issue for you, and it's time to maybe reach out to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia and get that waterproofing stuff sort of seen about. What can you do to prevent water from intruding into your home? Our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia can tell you all about that. Plus, foundation issues, cracks in the walls, down in the basement, you see those cracks in the foundation. You know that could be the sign of a bigger issue. All the more reason to trust our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They'll do great work for you here on this. They've got an entire team of engineers on staff. They're the only ones in our market who can say they have that level of resource to be put to work for you on your issue, whether it be foundation or waterproofing or whatever it might be. So they're proud partners of UGA. It's fun to support those that support the Dogs. And we remain incredibly grateful for all of you who have shown so much kindness and support to Engineered Solutions of Georgia because they've been good friends of ours for a long, long time. A great, dependable partner. And we're just so proud of our relationship with them and so proud that so many of you have gotten a great experience from them there as well. So please give them a call, 678-ESOG-NOW. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get Jake Fromm before the show is done today. Looking forward to that. We're going to get Connor Riley coming up in a moment there, too. And we're going to go around the doghouse in just a minute there as well. But before any of that, can I make just like a big announcement here just for a moment? We talk a lot about Go for 2 in 22. Well, guess what? It's about to be Go for 2 in 22 season. It's about to be upon us. It's going to begin here first Saturday in December. In fact, we're kind of calling that our kickoff to Go for 2 in 22 season. And we're going to have a big celebration to kick it off there on that date. It's our Go for 2 in 22 tailgate, which is going to take place right there in the Home Depot backyard, just outside Mercedes-Benz Stadium before Georgia takes on LSU in the SEC Championship. I want you to go ahead and know about this now to get ready to take action on this and be a part of the big on sale day, which is actually going to be tomorrow. So let me give you a lot of the details here as it relates to the Go for 2 in 22 SEC Championship tailgate. As I said before, Home Depot backyard on Saturday, December 3rd. It's going to take place 3 hours prior to kickoff that day. If you're a part of it, you get open bar, all the food you can eat, entertainment, of course, a very special second generation, by the way, Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. I'm wearing first gen Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt, but for this big event, we're actually going to unveil a second generation Go for 2 in 22 t-shirt. That's how big this is going to be. Now, here's the good news. For the first 100 people who sign up to be a part of this, beginning tomorrow, your ticket's only going to be $100 each. What a great deal that is. A great experience to be a part of this. And on sale date for that is tomorrow. Now, only 100 at that price. So you got to act quickly to be a part of that. And that begins tomorrow. So be ready. Have your clicker finger ready to go because tomorrow you can click in and you can be one of the first 100 to get in for $100. And, of course, how do we offer something like this at such a great price? Because of great sponsors like our friends at R.S. Andrews, Marlowe's Tavern. By the way, big announcement coming with Marlowe's here coming up very soon, too. Kroger, the Wilson PC, personal injury attorneys, Farm Bureau, Georgia Farm Bureau, of course, the 7-6 Apparel, Royal Caribbean, and Discover Dunwoody there as well. So an incredible experience coming up, a great chance for you to be a part of all of this. On sale date begins tomorrow, and the first 100 tickets available at just $100. So all of that is coming up. So with that said, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia's own credit union. Georgia did sustain a decommitment yesterday. Very good-looking defensive back Daniel Harris from the class of 2023, big-time four-star prospect, announced his decommitment. I'll show you a little bit of this if you're watching on video on social media, saying he'd like to thank the University of Georgia, Coach Smart, and Fran Brown for building a great relationship with me and my family. I'd also like to thank all the Georgia Bulldog fans who supported me. However, after countless hours of discussing the best possible opportunities, I've decided to decommit from Georgia and open up my recruitment. Now, when you hear stuff like this, you're always kind of left to wonder, what's really going on here? Is this, the player getting mad and leaving and going somewhere else? Is this Georgia, kind of moving off the player as a way of maybe offering the scholarship to somebody else? We don't like to talk about that, but that's kind of a fact of a matter in some cases. The sense that I've gotten from people that I've talked to here is that Georgia very much likes Harris and still very much wants Harris to be a part of the program. And just because Harris has decommitted here doesn't mean that he won't be. Now, obviously, by opening things up, the chances of him not being a part of this class are certainly greatly increased. But this is not, to use the word that sometimes gets used, what I've been told here is Georgia's not processing Harris and, it's not moving off him so they're going to get somebody way better or something like that, or at least that's the way that sometimes these kinds of things get discussed. That's not what this is. I think logically you're left to interpret, my gosh, look at all the defensive backs that Georgia signed, in the 2022 class, the incredible collection of Jaheim Singletary and Julian Humphrey and Dalen Everett, and think about what Georgia has in line here for the class of 2023 already. There are a lot of defensive backs in this program, both kind of waiting the wings for their chance to play and waiting the wings in this class of 2023 for their chance to join the program. And, maybe if you're Harris, you're kind of left to wonder, well, where do I fit in on that if there's so much depth? And you have to be led to believe that certainly he's been kind of pushed in that direction by coaches, whether it be, Penn State, or that's one of the programs that seems to be, kind of in the mix for him right now. You got to imagine that it's fairly easy to try to de-recruit against Georgia, or I guess negative recruit against Georgia, just on the basis of the level of depth that they have. But this is one of those things where the way in which the player sees the overall program depth and the way in which Kirby Smart sees the overall program depth is a little bit different, because even after last year's sort of record haul of elite cornerbacks into this class, elite defensive backs overall into this class, at the time, Kirby still didn't feel like they quite had enough. So for some context here on why I believe that Georgia is still likely to chase Harris down hard and still try to win this recruiting battle, let's let you hear Kirby last year on what it is they value from defensive backs and the sheer number of those guys they want in the program. This is Kirby from last year on the context of defensive backs in light of Harris's decommitment. Take a listen to this.
I don't think you actually ever know exactly what you have. You certainly feel great about them, but to tab anybody, the next guy, the first guy to start, I think it's hard. The length and the speed is what sticks out the most. I think, we missed some size in recent years, and we like to have length. We like to have toughness. I like intelligence. I like ball skills. I think a lot of these qualities and traits show up. Your ability to play man-to-man. I think more in college football now than ever before, if you have a liability in coverage, it's easier to find it. It used to be we were all up in a little phone booth, and now we're all out here. So your mistakes or your guys that can't cover, it's almost out of control. They spot it on you and they get you. I think this group, number one, has speed. They have man-to-man cover ability. They're going to help us, but there's just not enough of them. And what's interesting is it used to be you couldn't find O linemen and D linemen, and I still think they're hard to find, but you see these schools, top-notch schools, all on the same DBs because there's not enough of them to go around. The premier position right now for a lot of people is to go play wide out, and we got to find some guys that can cover those guys.
So I think this just sort of speaks to what the challenge is at a place like Georgia. Kirby looks at the situation in defensive back and says, hey, we still don't have enough. And yet for players like Harris, you're led to believe that he's been told Georgia's got way too many, you'll never play. And I think the truth is obviously, probably not quite as fatal as the negative recruiting that Harris is hearing right now, but it is a tough sell for a place like Georgia that wants to play a lot of defensive backs, but also wants all the guys in the program to be of an elite level that, getting players to want to help contribute to that depth and be a part of that depth, that's not always going to be an easy sell, but it's obviously the challenge that you have to endure if you want to be a program at the level that Georgia is. So bottom line here for now, Harris does decommit. My guess is Georgia still continues to recruit him. And obviously for a program like Georgia that sees the way in which defensive backs winning one-on-one battles, much like the Tennessee game from a couple of weeks ago, how that fits into the overall championship success formula, my guess is that Georgia's going to stay in pursuit of players like this and hope to win with Harris and players like him before it's all said and done. That's Around the Doghouse here today. It's presented by our friends at Georgia's own credit union. And, of course, this is that time of year in which it seems like we're using that credit card a lot right now. You're traveling. A lot of Dog fans in Starkville this past week. Many more heading towards Lexington here this week, getting ready for the SEC championship. Or maybe you're starting your holiday shopping there as well. Whatever you're doing, when you're making those purchases, I think one of the things you're going to find that makes the purchase experience, things you're already doing even more fun and more enjoyable for you, is using that Visa Signature Platinum card from our friends at Georgia's own credit union. Because when you use the card for the things that you're already buying, you're going to get so many great incentives for that there as well. With the Visa Signature and Platinum card, you can earn flex rewards, but you can be used for just about anything. Gift cards, cashback, travel, merchandise, so much more. You can also earn up to $150 just for opening your new Platinum or Signature card. Now, there are some restrictions that apply, so to find out about those and to find out about what makes the Visa Signature and Platinum card from Georgia's own credit union so great, you can go online, georgiasown.org, for a lot more on that. That is georgiasown.org for a lot more on that today. All right, it's Jake Fromm here before we're all said and done. Jake will no doubt have some great thoughts. But for now, on what's next for Georgia in its 2023 recruiting class, the CFP Top 25 re-released tonight, and the status for Georgia as it gets ready for Kentucky. Let's do all those things with Connor Riley here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll bring in Connor Riley here. We'll do a little bit of recruiting before we kind of move into the stuff on the field for Georgia. The Daniel Harris decommitment from yesterday, the sense that I get, Connor, and I'm guessing you'll agree with this, is I think that Georgia kind of stays in the midst and tries to recruit Harris, the sense that I get. But that doesn't mean they'll win it because, let's face it, it's sometimes kind of easy to negative recruit against Georgia right now. Maybe that's what Harris is falling prey to here. So let's just use this as, I guess, kind of a springboard to sort of talk about the snapshot of where things stand with Georgia in this late stage of the 2023 cycle right now.
Yeah, I think with the rise in NIL and, we've seen in recent years a trend of recruits committing earlier and earlier, and so there are, in theory, less guys, quote-unquote, available or uncommitted at the end of the cycle. You're going to see a lot of flips in this next month in terms of guys that are committed to a school currently right now, and because of the way boards are shaking out and because of the way people are viewing their recruiting classes, they're going to make a renewed push and a renewed effort at some of these guys that have been locked in for a while, and that seems to be the case here with Daniel Harris. And so I think over these next couple of weeks, as we see coaching changes, as we see, the transfer portal, the impact that's going to have on certain programs there, you're going to see recruitments like Daniel Harris, a guy that was pretty locked into Georgia for a while, say, hey, I'm going to reconsider my options because the grass seems pretty green right now in a lot of different spots. And he's earned the ability and the right to do that. But while you can understandably be worried about this happening in Georgia and Georgia potentially losing a very talented cornerback prospect that they like a lot, Daniel Harris out of the South Florida area, know that Georgia is also probably going to be on the receiving end of this as well in terms of benefiting from it and being able to flip players because they come to realize they might not love the current situation, the situation, the way things are headed at the end of the recruitment stage.
And I think in the case of Harris, this to me is a perfect example of something I talk about quite a bit, which is that there's a big difference in the way in which coaches define depth and the way in which players define depth. We heard audio from Kirby last winter of saying, hey, we don't have enough defensive backs. And yet for a guy like Harris, you would presume that he's hearing in his ear all the time, Dalen Everett, Julian Humphrey, Jaheim Singletary, A.J. Harris, Marcus Washington, like on and on you can go with all these names where from Harris's perspective, gosh, they got so many cornerbacks. From Kirby's perspective, knowing how many they want to play and knowing how valuable that position is in a game like, say, Tennessee, which doesn't seem to be going out of style anytime soon, that the way in which coach defines depth and player defines depth, it's two very different definitions, is it not?
Right. I mean, you look at this current group of defensive backs that Georgia brought in this last haul. Dalen Everett has clearly made a name for himself and I think established himself as a top freshman cornerback. And, it's fair to wonder where things stand if you're a guy like Julian Humphrey or Jaheim Singletary, who were top 100 prospects and very talented players in their own rights. And you turn around, and this is just the reality of playing at Georgia. A.J. Harris is a five-star cornerback. Harris is a guy who this staff really, really liked a lot. And so you look around and see Georgia doesn't rotate their corners a whole lot. And there's a talented guy already coming back next year in Kamari Lassiter. Dalen Everett seems really well positioned to be a starter for Georgia in the event that Keely Ringo in all likelihood goes on in the NFL draft. Where is sort of my playing time going to be? And that's understandable there as well, considering even a guy like Nyland Green, a former top 100 recruit, is just having a hard time getting onto the field in terms of that Georgia defense there right now. And Kirby's spoken about this before. It seems like defensive back and wide receiver, for a variety of reasons, those are the positions where if you're not getting on the field early, it seems like you're going to lose them. So I think that certainly factors into here as well. Maybe taking a look at the lay of the land in terms of the way this Georgia defense and the way that specifically that cornerback position is set up in terms of the near and long-term future of it's going to be like you got to be an absolute stud to get on the field and make an impact there, and that's not necessarily going to be for everybody.
I want to talk about the situation for Georgia on the field. I thought Georgia showed a lot at Mississippi State on Saturday, but as a fan here, Connor, I didn't really need to see it. My hope and wish for this game this past weekend was I just want to see Georgia win, and they did. And I sort of feel the same way about Kentucky on Saturday. And I know this is a Kentucky team that just lost to Vanderbilt and really got blown out big time by Tennessee, a few weeks ago. This is not a good Kentucky team. But once again, this is not a style point game for me. It's 15 degrees or however cold it's going to be. It's the final SEC game of the year. To me, this was that stretch before the year that we all talked about. At least I talked about a lot. Back-to-back road games in November. Well, now it's here, and I just kind of want to see Georgia get through it and just kind of get ready for what comes next with the SEC championship. I don't have much in the way of expectations on Saturday. I just sort of want it over with. What do you think about kind of where things stand for Georgia going to Kentucky on Saturday in light of what we learned about Georgia on the road at Mississippi State this past week?
Yeah, I think you're bringing a good point up there in just going out and winning. Because, again, when you play 4 straight SEC games, I mean, they've done schedule analysis on this before. It's really, really hard to win all 4 of those games. It's a near impossibility that you're going to win all 4 of those games against 4 teams that are all bowl eligible. Right now, they've won those first 3 games of that sort of stretch, Florida, Tennessee, and Mississippi State, by an average of 20 points. And I think there's a real chance you once again see that this coming Saturday. And I think if you were told, if I had sat here and told you on your show in August that, hey, that 4-game stretch that I think we're all rightfully worried about, one of which is going to feature, a top 6, top 7 team in Tennessee, you're going to win all 4 of those games by 20-plus points or by an average of 20 points, you've been, no way, Connor. Don't gaslight me on my own show.
Right.
And so I think if they go out there, and again, they take care of business, this Kentucky team that I think has been a real disappointment from what their expectations were to start the season. I think if they go out there and just take care of business, and because this is a Kentucky team that, let's face it, they play a style that allows them to win a lot, but when you play a style that is similar to what Georgia wants to do, and you don't have the athletes to really out-athlete them, you're just going to go and you're going to get beat around for 4 quarters. We saw that happen a year ago with Michigan. I think this Kentucky team is a less talented version of that Michigan team. And Kentucky may shorten the game to make it, a tighter game, a game within the point spread, so to speak, there like we saw last season. But I don't feel very confident that Kentucky is really even capable of keeping this a close game. I can see it very well. The final score might be 27-13, 31-13, something along the lines of that. But at no point is Kentucky ever really threatening to beat Georgia this weekend because of the way that program is set up and how just well this Georgia team as a whole is executing, even when they don't play a great game on Saturday. I thought it was a B-minus effort, and they go out there and they still win by 26 points.
Well, to be fair, and I don't know, you're probably not aware of this, we played this audio again before you joined us. Vince Marrow, Kentucky assistant, back in the summer said the 30-13 loss that Kentucky suffered in Athens last year. They were one play away from winning the game, according to him. So you never know how these Kentucky folks.
17-point plays in football. I didn't know that.
Right, exactly. That's kind of how we reacted to that there too. Hey, there's a lot of parsing of words right now based on what Kirby said about A.D. Mitchell yesterday. I think a lot of folks are assuming he's getting healthier, and maybe the words that Kirby spoke yesterday made some believe that maybe that actually is true. What do you think of the current state of A.D. Mitchell's health as you head towards getting closer to, anyway, the most pivotal moments of the season?
I guess part of me, they want to see him be as 100% as he can be and out there, and knowing that, you're going to need him for those big playoff games, that SEC championship game against LSU, and you want him as close to 100%, not necessarily working his way back into full strength in terms of doing it over the course of the game. But, at this point in time, I've just thrown my hands up and trying to understand what has gone on with this ankle injury. And I'm not a doctor here, so, again, and I totally understand the reasoning that Kirby Smart has given. It makes a lot of sense. It sounds like the tightrope surgery that, as he mentioned specifically yesterday, a lot of guys have had. Yeah. It just wasn't available to him. And I even point out with that tightrope surgery, Tua wasn't exactly fully healthy after it there, and Cedric Tillman missed a game last week for Tennessee as well. So, there just is this is an injury that has lingered, and it just hasn't gotten better the way I think a lot of people expected it to. And when you have lower body injuries like that, that's reality. That's just sometimes the way things are. And guys can sort of end up having a lost season. And that's what's happened here for A.D. Mitchell. And so, he's played 5 snaps since the end of the Oregon game. And look, anything they get out of him this week, quite frankly, I'm not even sure what the benefit is in playing him this week is, unless you just want to get him back out there and have him start getting reps once again, because look, they don't need A.D. Mitchell to beat Kentucky. And I think we've actually seen enough progress from the wide receiver room as a whole in these last 2 games against Mississippi State and Tennessee, where you have guys like Glad McConkey, Kyrus Jackson, Marcus Rosemary-Jackson, all making plays downfield. You feel a little bit more comfortable about what you have in that wide receiver room. So, there's not a need to see A.D. Mitchell for me this week, but in terms of just trying to figure out his health, I have no idea what has gone on with this ankle injury, because he's been out close to, 10 weeks now. And Kirby Smart said against Stanford when this injury first happened, he could have gone back into the game if he needed to. I don't think anyone has expected the injury to turn into the situation that it has.
Let me finish with this. CFP Top 25 comes out tonight. Now, folks should not forget this is that basketball doubleheader, so it's actually not coming out until 9 p.m. or so tonight, sometime around that window for this announcement. Obviously, there's very little drama for Georgia at number 1, but I do think the situation around Georgia is getting more interesting. I think that TCU's continuing to win and win closely is kind of amazing. Obviously, there's a very good chance they still lose before the season's done, and once they lose, they're out of this because the committee doesn't want them, I believe, in the playoff. But as long as they keep winning, they're in the top 4 right now. It would seem that they, as an undefeated Power 5 champion, likely make the playoff, which is a very different kind of scenario than I think we had been mostly considering, or at least I had been mostly considering for a good number of weeks. I keep expecting them to lose, and they just haven't yet. What is interesting to you right now about the potential, threats to Georgia, the other contenders for the playoff? What kind of jumps out at you, Connor, with 2 weeks to go here in the regular season?
Well, BA, if you'll allow me to toot my own horn, I did tell everyone on Go With The Flow last week that spreadsheets do not win you football games.
Fair
and
enough.
TCU was going to outright win and beat Texas.
Fair enough.
Look what happened. The
Fair
spreadsheets
enough.
got annihilated by those vibes from TCU.
Fair enough.
I think the thing that is most interesting to me, or the thing that I look at probably this week, is what happens with USC. And I realize we're going to learn a lot more about USC in these next 2 weeks when they play UCLA this week, they play Notre Dame next week. Those are 2 real marquee chances to add to their resume and what they might be able to do, because look, there's a real world where, and I give TCU a lot better chance of winning out than I think you and a lot of other people do. I think they can beat Baylor this weekend, and then they have Iowa State and probably Kansas State those last 2 games. The Kansas State game would be in the Big 12 championship. I think they can win all 3 of those games. If USC wins out and TCU wins out, I've got some news. Tennessee's not getting into the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, oh boy, would it be fun to just open up Twitter that afternoon. Now, I've got a ton of work to do that day, and also Samuel Mpemba is going to be announcing his commitment that day as well. So December 4th is going to be a very busy day if you're a Georgia fan. But in the event where a one-loss Tennessee misses the playoffs because of USC and TCU, man, there are going to be a lot of upset fans out there, because I do think there's a world where you can make the case for sure Tennessee is one of the 4 best teams. But TCU won all of their games in this theoretical scenario. USC lost 1 game on the road and a 2-point conversion late. And Tennessee's not going to make the playoff, and I think that speaks to, I think the big reason why we're ultimately going to see this move to a 12-team playoff where Tennessee has an unquestionably great season. I think a team that, I don't think they can win a national title this year, because I think that they had a chance at doing that and they got absolutely punked in Athens. They played a playoff team and lost pretty handily, but there's a lot of delusional fans out there that still believe that this is one of the 4 best teams that should make the playoff. And based on the way USC things sort of go for them these next couple of weeks, I think there's a very clear path of them getting boxed out. Now, USC could go on and lose.
That's right.
As you mentioned, TCU has played a ton of close games, and they're due potentially for a loss there, but there's a very real scenario in play where Tennessee gets boxed out of the college football playoff by USC and TCU teams, I think, where if you put them on a neutral field right now, I'd imagine Tennessee is probably a touchdown favorite over both of those teams.
Connor, I think that's great analysis, really interesting stuff. Thanks for being here today. We'll look forward to reading a bunch more from you at DawgNation.com, and, of course, speaking to you back here in the program again very soon as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that the bottom line is I think Connor's analysis there is mostly right, that the results on Saturday for me were probably not good if you're Tennessee. That team at 5 that wants to get into the top 4. We've seen 2 SEC teams, obviously, in the playoff a couple of times before. Tennessee hoping to be one of those here this year. The TCU win was not good for them, and the presence of a team like USC in the Pac-12, a team that has a little bit of cachet around it for right or wrong reasons, I don't think that's good for Tennessee either. We'll talk more about that here in a moment, and we'll catch up with Jake Fromm here coming up there too. Before that, let me remind you that we're cruising around the SEC right now, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. I'm getting excited about a couple of Royal Caribbean cruise vacations coming up, but the one I want you to be aware of is the one we have with all of DawgNation coming up in April 24th through the 28th, on board Independence of the Seas. Now, Independence of the Seas is a great ship because it's got so many cool things to do on board. Some of the specialty restaurants that Royal Caribbean's famous for, obviously a lot of those on board Independence of the Seas. In particular, there's a Playmaker Sports Bar and Grill on board Independence of the Seas, which is really fun. It's like a classic sports bar on a cruise ship. This is the kind of thing that, like, years ago, I don't think you would really be able to do on a cruise ship. For whatever reason, you didn't have that style of restaurant on ships, but now you kind of do. That's a great experience. There's, obviously Chops Grill and kind of the classic steakhouse, and just so many fun specialty restaurants on board. And obviously the ports we're visiting, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay. These are great, great experiences and a great thing for you to be a part of. In addition to all of that, you also have the special DawgNation events there too. So it's not just the entertainment, the dining, and the ports that Royal Caribbean's kind of famous for, including that private island Perfect Day Coco Cay, but it's also special DawgNation events there as well. So check out the website. It's royaldogs.com. That's royaldogs.com. That's a special website made by Jessica Slater, a terrific travel agent who has kind of constructed this website to give you all the details you need about what makes the cruise vacation such an exciting experience. You can also give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147, and be a part of our cruise with DawgNation coming up April 24th through the 28th, leaving from Port Canaveral, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, and having a great time with all of you. Now, it is never easy to transition from something like that, fun and happy and exciting, to something so sad and tragic, but obviously many of you are aware of the fact that there was a shooting in Charlottesville, Virginia. 3 Virginia football players killed here, and I guess the suspect here for now is a former Virginia player himself, and it has just been such an awful thing. And I have to admit to you that yesterday a lot of these events were transpiring, and I really wasn't too aware of all of this. And, in the aftermath of the show, you kind of realize everything else had been kind of going on. And I saw where the official UGA athletics account obviously shared some much-deserved condolences to our friends up at the University of Virginia, and just a horrible, horrible situation. We look at college sports as being kind of escape from some of the more serious things in life, but in a situation like this, you're just not able to do that. And I don't have any kind of wise words to say about all this other than it is just very, very sad. And to our friends at Virginia, to our friends in that state, the Charlottesville area, we're just so sorry and just so sad. And it was nice to see, UGA sharing those messages yesterday, but it does not change the fact that they have been through something terrible there, and we're very sorry about that. And it's hard to kind of do something like that and then have the regular conversation, but at least wanted to make mention of that here on today's show, and we'll try to see if we can kind of awkwardly now stumble back into what we typically talk about around here. And Connor made mention of this when he was on with us a moment ago, that we did find out a decision date for five-star edge rusher Samuel Mpemba. He's going to announce his commitment decision the day after the SEC championship. Mpemba's obviously visited Georgia a ton as of late, and this is one of those elite recruits that Georgia's relationship seems to be about as deep and entrenched with as can possibly be. He is not committed to Georgia, and yet we see examples over and over again of him sort of showing some love to Georgia here. So we will see kind of how all of this plays out here moving forward. But obviously for now, it would seem that Georgia might be in good shape with Mpemba. Certainly you hope that's the case. And the day after the SEC championship, Mpemba is going to announce. So stay close to DawgNation there on that day, watching closely to see if Georgia can close the deal with Mpemba, who actually just took his official visit to Georgia for that Tennessee game a couple of weeks ago. So that is big news there on that front. And then finally, before we speak to Jake Fromm here in a moment, CFP Top 25 comes out tonight. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I think the overall takeaway here is if you're looking for that second SEC team in right now, hard to make that case necessarily for Tennessee if TCU keeps winning, because TCU is ranked ahead of Tennessee right now. And improbable as it is, if they continue to win these games, you're kind of talking about a team that will now have a conference championship to even bolster its resume. And logically, you just don't really know how you could possibly say, after watching Tennessee play the less substantial portion of its schedule, even if they're hanging big numbers against the likes of Missouri, South Carolina, there just isn't much of a mandate behind all of that. And the Pac-12 now only has one team kind of in playoff contention, because UCLA did lose to Arizona over the weekend. Obviously, Oregon lost to Washington in a more high-profile game. But the team they do have is USC. And one thing that Lincoln Riley showed you before is that he can get to the playoffs. Now, he doesn't win when he gets there, but he can get there. And so that becomes a little bit of a factor, too. And that's before you get into what happens with both Michigan and Ohio State. I think it sort of stands to reason that Ohio State is viewed more favorably by the committee than Michigan is. They played a tougher non-conference schedule. They just also probably have kind of a more exciting brand right now. We saw Michigan in the playoff a year ago, and they got beaten up. But if you're Georgia, that's what you're kind of thinking about. You're kind of thinking about, hey, what's happening underneath us? And as a very good Dog fan pointed out to me on Twitter this week, hey, what would happen if Georgia's to stumble? Can Georgia can it guarantee its place in the college football playoff prior to going 13-0, and what would need to happen for that to be the case? That's something else to kind of watch for, but that takes a little bit more time to unpack than we have for you right now. Instead, we'll wrap up cruise around the SEC, and now here, courtesy of our friends at Kroger, we'll get ready to welcome in the terrific former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, who's also, I'm sure, got a big smile on his face because the NFL franchise that he's a part of, the Washington Commanders, also got a big win last night on Monday Night Football. So I guess, Jake, congratulations in order here. The undefeated Philadelphia Eagles, undefeated no more, which is not good news for a couple of former Dogs there on the Eagles, but certainly good news for the Commanders. So I guess congratulations to see that Monday Night Football win last night.
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? Thank you. Absolutely, man. Great news for the Commanders. Great win last night. Got in late. But, man, it was awesome. Awesome to get a win, especially on Monday Night Football. It was a very awesome, fun atmosphere last night.
Yeah, no doubt. It was a ton of fun to watch. And, these Georgia Bulldogs have been a ton of fun to watch there as well. And, Jake, you understand what it takes to go on the road and win in the SEC. You certainly did that a lot during your career. And this past Saturday, we saw Georgia in Mississippi State. I don't believe, if memory serves, you ever played in a game quite as cold as that one was. Maybe you did, but it seems like maybe you didn't. Cold environment. A team that 6-3 coming in, winning record type team, pretty tough team to play, and yet Georgia, even after kind of shooting itself in the foot a couple of times, still kind of emerged with a pretty comfortable win. What do you think we learned about UGA last week?
Yeah, I think they're poised. I think they're experienced, and they're just they keep continuing to grow and to build on top of it. Obviously, maybe it didn't start out the way we had all envisioned or wanted it to. Especially with the punt return for a touchdown at halftime. But the way they responded coming out in that second half was how the number one team in the country should play. They did play, and it was exciting. They had some big plays. They were dominant on defense. So that's what we're used to and accustomed to seeing. And I think we'll build on that going in to play in another hostile environment in Kentucky this week.
And you mentioned the situation with the end of the half stuff, and Kirby was as candid about that as I've heard him be, saying, hey, this was as bad of an end of the half scenario as I've ever been a part of. But as a quarterback, can you kind of explain some of the logistics of this, of having a package of plays and making the decision to kind of, I guess, shift to a passing play there as opposed to a running play? What's Stetson trying to process there in that moment, which leads to the decision to go pass play on third down as opposed to a running play? Kirby said that there was, I guess kind of a package of plays there, and maybe I guess he audibled to the passing play. For those of us who haven't been in that situation, what's that kind of like for a quarterback there in that moment?
Yeah, so it really goes back to a lot of talks back during the week. It happens in the quarterback room, and then obviously sometimes with the head coach. Just, hey, what we're seeing situationally in the game, and there was multiple times throughout my career where it's given a list of plays that could check to depending on what the third and distance was, and then also where we were at in the field and kind of the flow of game and what coverage we were getting as well. So looks like he maybe had a sheet of plays kind of listed on his head or maybe on the wristband and going to the best play he saw fit.
So, Kirby also kind of mentioned the idea of, hey, maybe kind of, I guess, in some cases, like limiting the amount of freedom he has in a situation like that. Were you ever as a quarterback in one of those situations where in some games, hey, you had more freedom to do what you wanted, and in some games they kind of, I guess, said, hey, in these situations we want you to do this no matter what? Does the freedom kind of fluctuate there, or for a guy like Stetson, who was a veteran much the same way you were near the end of your career, you pretty much had sort of free reign to do whatever you wanted in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think the baseline is higher for sure to be able to do kind of whatever you want, but there's also some give and take week to week on certain things, just depending on the predictability of what we're getting from the other team going into the week and the comfortability we have in knowing that they're going to line up in the way we think they're going to line up. So that has a lot to do with it. But also myself, and then also I'm assuming just like Stetson as well. I mean, week to week can change a run to a run to a pass, pass to a pass, and a pass to a run. He can do all those things and put guys in the right spot to succeed. And man, I remember playing. I had a run check list that was 2 pages long that me and Pittman went over. On Mondays during the week, and it was fun. Just trying to put guys in the right spot to succeed and make sure we were really good at running the football.
So it was very cold on Saturday. Very, very cold. I'm always kind of fascinated by this because, Jake, it seems like to me, especially for, you grew up Middle Georgia, and a lot of these guys grew up in South Florida, places like that, you just can't replicate the cold very much down here because in the summertime, you can always go outside and practice and get used to the heat, or if it's raining, you can dip the football in water and have a wet football. But like cold, you just can't replicate that. And I frankly thought Georgia seemed to handle it pretty well. And I can tell you, even just trying to do like a show outside where you're like your hands are getting numb, I mean, it's definitely a very different process just to kind of exist outside when it's that cold. How do players, seem to handle, that? Because to me, it seems like it'd be way harder to play when it's that cold. And yet you didn't see a lot of long sleeves under the Georgia jerseys on Saturday. When they kind of came in to the stadium with the dog walk, they were all kind of wearing their normal clothes. They didn't seem to be that bothered by it. And obviously they played pretty well throughout it. So how do you do that knowing that it just feels so different than what you're used to?
Yeah, got definitely a taste of this myself.
Yeah.
Playing in Buffalo, playing in New York.
Sure.
And then even last night at Philly, it was a little chilly as well. But it's a mindset in a way in itself. But it's also just a grind and a toughness to get through it. Don't worry about it. You just go play. And I know up here in the league, I don't know if they did or the Dogs had it on Saturday night, but heated benches, some heaters on the sideline, those always help. For QBs, have your hand warmers ready. But the ball definitely changes, gets just a little bit harder, a little bit slicker there once the temperature starts getting under 40, 45 degrees. But as long as the wind's not blowing too bad, it's usually pretty good and pretty manageable. But it's always fun to see how people react to it. But I think you just have to be mentally tough and then just go out and play and not worry about it.
I want to ask you one more thing before we let you go. Before that, let me remind folks, it's Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. And by the way, as we head through the month of November here, we're getting close to Thanksgiving, and there are some great opportunities for you to get stocked up on everything you need for a great Thanksgiving celebration, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. That big table filled with all of those special menu items, the turkey or the sides or all of that. You get ready for a great Thanksgiving. Our friends at Kroger got you covered on all of that. In fact, you can check out more of this by going to Kroger.com/Thanksgiving for more on that. That's Kroger.com/Thanksgiving, and you can get big savings and all of the things you need to make this Thanksgiving special with you and your family. You can do that with our friends at Kroger. Kroger.com/Thanksgiving for a lot more on that. So, Jake, before I let you go, Kirby Smart said something very interesting on SportsCenter the other night. He's kind of talking about the way in which this team is kind of motivated right now. And one of the things that he said, and we would all understand, this team has a chance to win the national championship again, which is a really, really cool thing. But Kirby said prior to all of that, they're motivated right now because they want to win the SEC championship, something the 2021 team wasn't able to do. Well, Jake, you did win an SEC championship. Came very close winning a national championship, but you won the SEC championship. And as someone who enjoyed that celebration that night, getting revenge against Auburn, how special would it be for this team here in a couple of weeks if they can, along a journey to maybe winning a national championship, find a way to win that SEC title? As someone who won one, as someone who was a part of that, what did that mean to you, and what do you think that would maybe mean to this Georgia team here this year as well?
Oh, it's huge. It's an opportunity at redemption as well. But when it comes to the beginning of a football season and you're setting out your goals of what this team wants to be and what it wants to accomplish, it starts with winning the East, which they've done that. And then the next step there is winning the SEC championship. So that opportunity is right there in front of them to take care of business, to do everything they want to do, ultimately later in the season to win a playoff game and then to win a national championship. So it's part of the goal, it's part of the stepping stones. But man, it's a right, it's an honor, it's a privilege that nobody can take away from you and from your team. And it's a big deal because of just what the SEC is, how tough it is, the conference, and you're going to play the best from the other side. And usually it's always a pretty dang good football game.
That's right.
It's tough, it's physical, and it's going to come down to 4 quarters.
Well, Jake, I know how busy you are right now. You got so much going on, so I really appreciate you taking time to be with us here today. Appreciate our friends at Kroger for making it all possible, and we hope you enjoy your week. We'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you very soon here as well.
Awesome, Brad. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Good stuff there from former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. What a great thing that is. And Jake talks about tough physical football games. And listen, a lot of you know what the tough physical activity is about. And for you, maybe it's not football. Maybe it's just getting out in the yard and doing some yard work, or maybe trying to play golf, or running a marathon, whatever your thing is. Sometimes the physical part of that just sort of gets to you. Well, when it does, I want you to think about our friends there at Peachtree Orthopedics as well, as a great organization to know when you need to kind of get back into the game because of something that sort of happens to you. They are there for you as Atlanta's go-to orthopedic practice. They've been that way for more than 70 years. So it is a great, great name to know when you're a little bit banged up and you need a little bit of help kind of getting back to your best again. They got great physicians and specialists that can work with you for whatever body part you may be kind of dealing with here. It seems like for me at different times it's a different body part. If that's the case, the Peachtree Orthopedics is there for you there as well. Their process helps you getting better to be a whole lot just more simple, really, because they're going to listen, they're going to understand your problem, they're going to explain the options to you that help eliminate the pain that you're dealing with right now, and they're going to make a plan for recovery that gets you back living life the way that you enjoy. Plus, they got all kinds of hours that make it convenient for you. You can kind of come in on Saturday, same day, evening, whatever works for you. They want to try to find a way and a plan and a schedule that fits your very, very busy life. So all of that to know when it comes to our friends at Peachtree Orthopedics. You can find them online at peachtreeorthopedics.com. You can book an appointment. You can make a plan to learn how to feel better, to feel healthier, to be pain-free. Our friends at Peachtree Orthopedics give you a chance to do that. peachtreeorthopedics.com for more on that. So it was kind of an odd scene this past weekend with Georgia fans kind of taking over Tuscaloosa. Alabama had played on the road at Ole Miss. Tuscaloosa on its way to Starkville. I don't really know you can get to Starkville from here without going through Tuscaloosa. It's just, I mean, that's really where Starkville is, on the other side of Tuscaloosa, and you're kind of driving back roads. Really a lot to get there, kind of going from that, it's basically, you got to take 20 to 59 to Tuscaloosa, and you kind of go back roads to get to Starkville. So the point is, day after the game on Sunday, there were tons of Georgia fans all over Alabama. For the most part, the Bama fans were kind of good-natured about it. I heard a bunch of folks shouting at me, but they were kind of smiling as they were doing so. But there were a lot of Georgia fans there, and I kind of made a thing on Twitter about the Nick Saban statue. We'll give out a golden shoe here there today as well, because somebody else kind of found their time. This isn't a DawgNation approved gesture, but nonetheless, Drake Bryan having some fun with the Nick Saban statue, so we'll give him a golden shoe. And by the way, speaking of rivals to UGA, how about those lousy, stinking Gators? We'll remind them, too, 347 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, giving out another dose of whipping coming their way. That's 347 days from right now. Hashtag go for 2 in 22. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll see you tomorrow. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. So before we get going on today's R.S. Andrews Cool Down, Michael, I have a brief favor, if you don't mind. This has got nothing to do with Georgia football or anything. I left my lunch sitting out here, and it needs to go in the refrigerator. Would you mind grabbing my lunch and putting it in the refrigerator for me, please? I don't mean to make you do that, but I also don't want to ruin my lunch here. So I bring my lunch every day, and I just realized, boy, I got that thing sitting here, and I don't want that thing to go bad. So, Michael, if you wouldn't be kind enough to do that, I would certainly appreciate that. Thank you very much. We'll see if we can jam that in there and get ready to have a little lunch here when it's all said and done. I'm always very hungry when the show ends. I'm sure many of you are the same way around this time of day. So I was late getting to YouTube yesterday. I went to them last. I want to go to them first here today as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. So let's do that right now and let folks have their say over here. Memphis Dog says BA is avoiding food poisoning. I guess that's kind of what it is that I am very as you might imagine, I'm a little particular about certain things, and definitely food sitting out too long. That's just not my deal. I am not too keen. Like, I've worked with people over the years, especially on like some of the TV broadcasts, things like that, where like the crew, like, they serve the crew early in the day, and then you do the game. Well, that food's been sitting out for some cases like 6 hours, and it's like sitting out in the beginning of the season, like the hot sun. And like when you're doing like real work, like on a TV broadcast, the stuff that I'm doing, it's not that hard work. But the crew, I mean, a lot of that's heavy lifting, and it's a lot of stuff like that. So they're starved. So they'll go right back to that catered meal again at like 11 p.m. that's been sitting there since 4 p.m. and they just go right back to it. I don't believe my constitution's quite tough enough to handle that. But nonetheless, let's see what else is going on. Jay Shipe says it's 142 hours since the YouTube start. Is that true? Now, I did admit I was late getting to YouTube yesterday. I did admit that. But we are starting here on YouTube first today. Scott Pete on the subject of Kyrus Jackson's comments. Yeah, I wanted to play that today. I felt like we had to do the Harris decommitment, and I wanted to do the Marrow stuff just for fun. But the Kyrus press conference yesterday was unbelievable. I mean, Kyrus Jackson is just such a good dude. And, like, obviously, the Peach County program that Kyrus has been a part of has got such a great reputation. And you sort of understand why when you see the way in which Kyrus does his work. He's just such an important part of the Georgia team. And I'm telling you, a lot of that stuff seems like really corny and sentimental of, oh, these guys care more about the team than they care about themselves. And we're kind of in a day and age in which the college football world has just gotten really cynical about, well, I mean, you can even hear, like, even certain analysts now who are kind of like fed up with it all. Like, oh, all these guys care about the transfer portal, all they care about is whatever. And you can understand where some of that comes from. And yet when you hear like the opposite about Georgia, it's easy to just sort of assume that, these corny Georgia fans think they're the only team that's special. And yet there is a certain aspect of about the team-first mentality that Georgia has that does really seem to be pretty special. And I realize that doesn't mean these guys don't have personal ambitions and they, want to further their lives and about, making a living playing the sport. I do get all of that. But somehow, even with all the NFL aspirations that exist in a team like this, there is still something to be said for they kind of come together and they kind of seem to find a way to do it together. And I don't know, man. That's all these coaches write these leadership books all the time, and for the most part, they never really sell very many copies. For the most part, it's just kind of a thing that coaches do. But if you ever could write a book about how Georgia has gotten the level of buy-in that it's had over the course of these last couple of years, I do think that'd be a pretty valuable story because I think it really is real. I think that Georgia recognized what a lot of teams recognized after 2020 is that 2020 was just a gross, awful, terrible year. And it was ruinous to football. And I talk to high school coaches all the time. They are still trying to pull out of the rubble from 2020. When at the high school level, they weren't in weight rooms. A lot of these programs, I'm not being funny. I'm being real. Like they had kids that sort of fell out of the program and kind of fell out of school. And they don't know what, they just kind of lost contact with them. Like numbers went down and, the level of preparation went down. The high school was awful. Well, at the college level was a little bit different. You're still going to the weight room. You're still doing things like that, but you weren't meeting face to face. You weren't, that you weren't gathering together as a team very much. You were afraid to. You're afraid that one guy's going to get it and he's going to, close contact, social distancing type stuff. You're going to have 20 guys out the next game because they just came in contact with a player who tested positive. And we all remember what that was like to live through. But the point is that teams were so disconnected after 2020. I'm quite sure that Georgia felt very disconnected. And so they have worked very hard since then to change that. And I do believe that was a component part of how they won the national championship last year. I really do. Let me plug in here for a second. Yeah, I definitely think that was a big part of that. Elite GB says only selfless, high-character recruits are going to want to stay at a place like Georgia. I think that's kind of true, but I think there's also more to it than that, y'all. I think that, look, there are plenty of days where I am very, very selfish now, but over the course of my life, I've probably learned to be a little more selfless, not to say I'm a selfless person because I am not, at least not frequently. But I have learned to be a little bit more of that than I used to be. So here's the thing. It's like, well, of course, if you can identify selfless players and, team first type players in the recruiting trail, of course you want them to be a part of the program. But there are never going to be enough elite athletes who are also selfless at the high school level to populate a roster with. That's just never going to be the case because if you're an elite athlete, being an elite athlete at the high school level and being kind of like small ego, that doesn't typically go very well together. And I'm just being honest. It doesn't. That's not typically the kind of thing you see a lot of. So if you want a selfless team first type group of players, you can't just identify those players from a kind of exclusive standpoint as recruits. You sort of have to train them to be that way. You sort of have to take a selfishly minded player, and to a certain extent, we're all selfishly minded, but you sort of have to take a selfishly minded player and explain to him why it is actually in his best interest to not be that way. To say, hey, I know it seems like getting yours first is the most important thing, but here's something you may not have considered. Thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 4, that if you'll do this as a team, here's how you can benefit from that over the course of the long haul. And at Georgia, you do have a track record to kind of point that out. That is not propaganda. You're not lying to guys when you say that because look at last year's team as a for instance. Look at last year's defense in particular as a for instance on that. So I think the issue here is not to say you've got to identify selfless, team-first, team-oriented type players and only put those guys in the roster. Some of this is you take the talented elite athletes, you bring the ego that almost naturally comes with those kinds of guys because if you were that good of an athlete, you'd have a big ego too. If I was that good of an athlete, I'd have a big ego too. Like I wouldn't be able to walk the halls in my high school if I was as athletic as some of these guys were. My head wouldn't fit through the door. That's just a natural thing. But can you train someone prone to selfishness? Most people are. Can you train someone prone to selfishness to sort of see the value in not being that way? And it seems like Georgia's pretty good at doing that too. Jeremy Little says, humble yourself. in a roundabout way, that's all it kind of comes down to. Baggin and Friend says, I bet Burton wishes he was still at UGA. I'm sure he probably does at times. I'm sure that there are moments in which guys like this regret their decision. And to me, there's a little bit of LeBron James in some of this, where when I look at, and this is not going to get into like the GOAT discussion because everybody knows Michael Jordan's the GOAT, but when you look at LeBron James, like, to me, the biggest mistake that LeBron has made in his career, and he's one of the all-time great players, no one can dispute that, but one of the mistakes that LeBron has made is, I think far too often he's tried to control outcomes of, hey, if I can just get on this team and have the roster exactly the way that I want, then I'm going to be as happy as I want to be. And we have, 3 different examples, moving to Miami, going back to Cleveland, and then going to L.A., where that kind of wasn't true, where going to the right team, putting everything around me just perfectly, it's going to work out exactly the way that I want to. Outcomes can't really be controlled, even for someone like LeBron. And if that's true for LeBron in the NBA, that's really true for a lot of these college guys there as well. And by the way, when the SEC championship is over, like, the transfer portal is going to open back up again. And it's going to be Wild West. And Georgia may not be immune to it. I don't specifically know, but, it's just going to be Wild West type time. And once again, a whole bunch of players are going to be tempted with the notion of, oh, well, if I can just handpick my roster to be on, I can create a scenario for me that's going to work out exactly the way that I want it to be. But we have seemingly an endless array of counterexamples to that, where, being on the team that you want to be on, with the roster that you think you want to be a part of, in the system that you think you want to play in, and it doesn't work out quite the way you think it's going to. That outcomes are very difficult to control. Doesn't mean you shouldn't make decisions, but making a decision because you think you know how the outcome is going to play out, that is almost always a mistake. JJ says, if we lose to Michigan again for a second year in a row, you must be an Ohio State fan at home, which we haven't done in many years. I might go MIA for a while on college football and just study web development. I can understand that sentiment. It's interesting. I don't know how good Michigan is right now. They may be very good. They were pretty good last year. I think we learned more about them against Illinois on Saturday. I do think Illinois is pretty good. I know Illinois lost twice, 2 weeks in a row, but I do think Illinois is pretty good. It's just interesting to me, though, that a lot of people seem to assume that Ohio State's definitely better than Michigan. And I think the best way to explain this is Ohio State just has more star players, right? You've got, the quarterback Stroud, obviously got the emergence of Marvin Harrison Jr. at wide receiver, Henderson the running back a little bit, a couple of guys on defense now more so than they've had the last little bit. And so there just seems to be more star power on the Ohio State team, and a lot of people will assume that makes them better. Maybe it does. But it seems like Michigan quietly has maybe more of a chance to win in Columbus than maybe some have given them credit for. I would say that if Michigan beats Ohio State, there is still a chance, I think, that Ohio State makes the playoff as an at-large team. I would say if Ohio State beats Michigan, that becomes a little harder to do unless there's a whole lot of chaos, just simply because, Ohio State's got the non-conference win against Notre Dame, whereas the Michigan non-conference schedule is about as bad as it's been. So I think it's a really interesting comparison. And, the Michigan-Ohio State game's a little bit like some of these games that we've, talked about, where there's going to be a lot of interest in it. I guess with the Georgia Tech game now being once again at noon, they'll be playing at the same time as Michigan-Ohio State. But there'll be a lot of interest in that Michigan-Ohio State game. It's one of the most intriguing results the rest of the way in terms of who makes the college football playoff. Let's see what else. James F. says, can you speak on what will happen to the UGA schedule and the SEC when Texas and Oklahoma join? So right now we don't know. It is most likely going to be a 9-game conference schedule, and I've been led to believe that the 9-game when I say it's most likely, what I mean to say is it's more likely than not, I think, that they play a 9-game conference schedule, and it's also more likely than not they have 3 permanent opponents. One of those probably be Florida, one of those probably be Auburn, and then who knows what the third is going to be. There'd actually been some debate about who that third opponent should be, and I believe based on the history of having played them a whole bunch, it may be South Carolina more so than a team like Tennessee, which is kind of funny to think that now that Tennessee, by appearances, seems to be getting good again, that pretty soon Georgia might not be playing them every year anymore, which is kind of a strange thing, but it could be the case. But here's what I was thinking. It's funny you're asking me about this because here's what I was thinking about. So last Saturday, we had Arkansas LSU for the SEC West, at least in terms of LSU winning the game. Here's what I'd be curious to know. Did that game and the stakes, LSU wins and takes a big step towards winning the division. They still need some help, Alabama to win in order to clinch, but the stakes were fairly easy to understand. A Georgia win last week against Mississippi State clinched the East. An LSU win plus an Alabama win for LSU last week clinched the SEC West. Because you still have divisions, it's fairly easy to know what the championship game is going to look like. But coming up in a couple of years, that's not going to be the case. Now, I got to tell you something. A lot of y'all are the same way. I follow college football very, very closely. Not just Georgia, not just the SEC. I love the sport. I follow it very, very closely. I've got to tell you something. I have no idea who TCU is going to play in the Big 12 title game. I believe it's probably Kansas State, but I don't know for sure because it's like the best two conference records and not the two division winners. And so when you get into that situation, you have a lot of tiebreakers that likely play into this. And so here's what I'm thinking about for the SEC. And the Pac-12 is kind of similar on this, where it seems like the best two teams are Oregon and USC. But are they going to play for the conference championship? I honestly don't know that because, once again, you're kind of getting to a situation with no divisions in the Pac-12 where it's a lot of tiebreakers and a lot of conference record, and you can't really know this until the end. So here you have people like me, and I presume some of y'all, very into college football, and yet hard to say what the Big 12 title game is likely to be or what the Pac-12 title game is likely to be. So when the SEC does away with divisions, is that going to hurt our conversation? Are we going to be less satisfied this time of year if instead of saying, well, Georgia wins the East and LSU wins the West, all of a sudden now it's, well, the team with the two best records are going to play, which is whatever. Maybe that makes it better because in the case of the Big Ten title game, you've got obviously a lot of the strength in the Big Ten East. The Big Ten West winner, now that Illinois has kind of faltered a little bit, that's going to be a pretty weak team by comparison. So that's an example of divisions not exactly serving the Big Ten very well. But coming up in a couple of years, the way in which we talk about who's playing for the SEC championship, assuming there will still be an SEC championship, but I guess there probably will be, but the way in which we talk about it's going to be very different. It's going to be more like what the Big 12 is now, what the Pac-12 is now, where you're looking at the two teams that finish with the best record in conference, and that's going to lead to a decent amount of confusion late in the year. JJ says Purdue now has the best chance to win the Big Ten West. Yeah, the way in which Illinois has fallen apart, I think it's pretty wild, to be honest with you. All right, that's a lot of YouTube. Let me go over to Facebook for a moment. And let's see how folks are doing over there. All right, on Facebook. Once it loads, because it always takes forever. Still waiting. Now we're going. Here we go. On Facebook. Finally. Sandy Price says, please don't forget, Big Bear Alexander also, air quotes here, decommitted and then joined class once again. Maybe that's the same pathway for Harris here right now. I like that. He also gives you go for 2 and 22, which you know that I like. For sure. Ryan Walker says, Chef Kirby cooks up a 50-piece special with extra sauce, no napkins, and keep it messy. Stetson, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns. Let me get the rest of this because it's good. 250 yards, 3 touchdowns. Christopher Smith gets a pick 6. We might have a Carson Beck, C.J. Smith, and Gilbert sighting. Kendrick Perkins, big perk voice. I like that. I like that for sure. Ken Holcomb says, what are you having for lunch today? Grilled gator tail with fries and hush puppies? That sounds good to me right now. Ken, that sounds very good indeed. Matt Rukavina says, do you remember when Kentucky had Georgia circled? Maybe they should have had Ole Miss and Kakalaki circled instead. Or, yeah, maybe even Vanderbilt too, Matt. That's really funny. Really funny. Bobby Thigpen says, and I'm assuming this isn't the former Chicago White Sox closer, who actually also played at Mississippi State, I think. Bobby Thigpen says, I took Mississippi State in the points. Happiest I've ever been to lose money. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way on that. My official prediction was Mississippi State plus the 17. I thought this would be a pretty tough spot for Georgia. Now, as it turns out, it kind of was sort of a tough spot for Georgia. But Georgia's the sort of team that even in a tough spot finds a way right now to win by 26 or whatever it was it won by. So, Bobby, I'm also happy to be wrong about that. Jonathan Aaron says, how many of those 5 stars from Texas A&M do you think we will go after when they all hit the portal? Well, I do believe it's going to be Portal Palooza at Texas A&M this year. I do. How many of those will Georgia be interested in? I think that it all kind of comes down to how many spots Georgia has. Because I'm going to tell you something. I think quietly Georgia thought it might have more transfers off last year's team than it did. This is just a hunch that I have, a suspicion that I have. And so some of Georgia not taking a transfer was that Georgia actually didn't lose a lot of transfers. And that may be the outlier. Georgia may stand to lose a couple of more this year than it lost a year ago, which would potentially open the door for them to take a couple of more there as well. There are obviously some positions where you can kind of think of, you may think about running back, for instance. Georgia stands to lose some running backs off this year's team. You may think edge rusher because, you got to have that elite edge rusher. That may be a position that Georgia's kind of thinking about, and who knows what else. But yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of folks going shopping on that A&M roster here at a certain point. Derek Greason says, I love that we finally get to talk about that Kentucky coach from back in the spring. Derek, are you the one that brought that to my mind yesterday? Because I wanted to make sure we gave credit to the person who reminded me of that, because I'd almost forgotten about that. And so I was glad we could kind of stir the pot on that there for sure. Clarence Dawson says, if you need a house sitter for the 6 months of cruises I've got coming up, that he's got me. Well, I appreciate that. So as it stands right now, it's not as many as you sort of think. I mean, like the one that I'm going on in December is actually just a short cruise. Wonder of the Seas is being repositioned, and when they kind of move a ship to a new place, sometimes there's a chance to kind of take a little short cruise as it kind of sort of, it's not quite the maiden voyage because it's sailed before, but it's going to be sailing for the first time in this new port. And so there's a little bit of a, kind of a buzz about that. So, the one that I'm taking in December is actually only kind of about a half cruise. It's not a really full sanctioned cruise. This is kind of a promotional event, I guess you might say. The one in February, that's a full-on vacation. That's a 7-night cruise, taking my family. That's full-on vacation. That is vacation BA in like full utmost, winter tan, getting after it. That's vacation right there. And then obviously in April, we'll all be there together for the DawgNation cruise. So it sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, the DawgNation cruise, that's basically work. The December cruise is technically almost like work because, we're going there to help promote the fact that Wonder of the Seas is going to be sailing from Port Canaveral. The one in February is a true honest-to-goodness vacation. So, when you put it that way, it's not quite so many. Although there is a chance we do book another one at some point in time. Hugh Nash says BA in cruiseology. Yeah, there you go. I like that. Alan Hampton says, leave the portal alone. I'd rather have players who wanted to play for the Dogs to start with. I get that. Here's the thing I think you want. I think you want to be somewhere in between a coach like Nick Saban, which completely sold his soul to the transfer portal, and a coach like Dabo Swinney, who's completely resistant to the transfer portal at all. I believe he's only taken one player out of the portal, and that was a player that at one point in time played for Clemson. So, technically speaking, it's almost like Dabo's never taken a transfer. Saban probably took too many. So I think you want to be kind of right there in the middle of that, where you are open to transfers, but not dependent on transfers. That's what I think you want to be if you're Georgia, and I think that's kind of where they are. So I get the point you're making. I would be a little skeptical. I mean, anybody who would transfer to you, there's a reason they're transferring from their old place, and you have to consider that reason when you bring that player in your roster of, well, what is it about this guy that makes him want to leave the place that he already was? That's just real life. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you should, I believe, be completely resistant to transfers either. Miriam Corbin says, I'll be lost this weekend. Can't make the game due to church obligations. Whoever's going to Kentucky, please yell extra loud for me. Miriam, I hated that I missed you in Starkville this past weekend. I saw our buddy Chad Buchanan there, and he was talking about you a little bit. And so sorry I didn't get a chance to see you, and sorry you won't be in Lexington on Saturday. But we'll try to make sure we cheer loud for you, and we'll try to make sure we stay warm there as well, because the expectation is it's going to be even colder in Kentucky than it was in Starkville last week. Kentucky typically pretty cold this time of year. Joseph Kennedy says, dark and dreary day, much like every day for the Bama fan. That's pretty funny. Bill Sanders says, trying to conjure the image of me shirtless on the Lido deck with a finished long drink in hand, long drink strong. Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, I'll try not to subject the shirtless version of myself to too many people on the Dog Nation cruise, but come February, it'll be shirtless BA in full effect there on board Wonder of the Seas for sure. Let's see what else is going on. Derek Greason said he had not forgotten about Vince Marrow saying what he said. Well, Derek, we brought it back up today, so maybe we can kind of stir the pot and get these dogs fired up for this game on Saturday. John William Adams said, worried the Texas A&M kids don't have the right makeup. Jimbo did the opposite of the culture that Kirby did, the me approach. I think you're probably right about that. I do think there's been a little bit of a me-first culture embraced at a place like Texas A&M. Shortcuts have been taken. I don't think there's any doubt that's true. But as I said a little earlier, if all you did was take players who already had the perfect right attitude, you'd never have enough players because we're all kind of selfish when we're young. And if I was an elite athlete, I'd be even more selfish. And so there's a certain point of not, from a mindset standpoint, is this player exactly what we want? There's a certain standpoint of, from a mindset standpoint, is this player trainable and coachable? Can we get him to be the kind of player that we want him to be? And that's, I believe, the issue that Georgia has to deal with. Trust me, I don't want 8 transfers in this Georgia roster. I don't want 6 or 7 on this Georgia roster, I don't think. Would I potentially want 1 or 2? If it's the right 1 or 2, I might. Now, whether they come from A&M or somewhere else, for the right 1 or 2, I very well might. Alan Verboncic says his AD Mitchell hurt worse than we thought. Johnny Robinson says Kirby's just sandbagging. Yeah, I don't think Kirby's sandbagging because in order for that to be true, like one of these injuries one time has to be less serious than we were led to believe, and that almost never seems like that's the case. Now, I guess that Jalen Carter is kind of an example of that, but I do just believe that Mitchell's just been hurt, and Kirby just sort of drags there. Now, yesterday, Jimbo, somebody asked Jimbo about a bunch of injuries, and before the guy even finished the question, Jimbo's like, "They're all day to day." Basically, like, I don't care who the guy is, they're all day to day. I'm not telling you anything about injuries. And at A&M, we sort of know why that might be the case. You could have some early test drives of the portal going on there right now already, and a few of those guys may be injured while they're test driving that portal a little bit. But nonetheless, Kirby has a tendency to always say, "Yeah, we're hopeful to get so and so back." In the case of Mitchell, like the way the question about AD was phrased yesterday was, "Hey, did he re-aggravate that ankle deal, and did that reset the timeline?" And maybe that is just kind of what happened here. But it sounds like there's a good bit of pain tolerance issue related to that. Kirby keeps talking about a pain in the backside. That's kind of what the injury sort of is that it's like you want to get over it, but it just hurts. And if you're a wide receiver, it's hard to run when it hurts to run. And that's just kind of what this has kind of been for him. So it's so similar to the George Pickens thing last year of, and hopefully it all works out the same way, but you're going to see Mitchell finally play again. He's going to make some huge catch. And you're going to be left to wonder, well, gosh, what could this have been if he'd been here the entire time for this year? And it may play out that way. Now, that's still a somewhat happy ending, I guess. And obviously in the case of Mitchell, he is coming back next year, whereas Pickens, after last year didn't. But, I mean, this is a guy that very likely would have been a very big-time player for Georgia in a full season this year, and it just didn't happen. And so in some of the discussion of what Georgia isn't at wide receiver, some of these very serious injuries have to be, I think, a part of that discussion. Fred Gunn says, I was carrying Jimbo's water again. I wasn't carrying Jimbo's water. I was just saying something funny that he said. Listen, I have taken and willingly, openly, voluntarily taken tons of abuse in the Jimbo thing. I am open for whatever slings and arrows people want to throw at me. Like, you can't say that I haven't taken my medicine on that. But in this particular case, I was just joking about something he said. And if anything, what I was really doing was pointing out that some of these injured A&M players may not be quite as injured as you think. Philip Jordan Wells and Oren Chile having some fun at my expense, which is very funny. Philip Jordan Wells says, I'm going to pop out that Scott Sinclair six-pack. Boy, I wish that was the case. Sometimes I wonder, if I had everything at my disposal these Georgia players have at their disposal, the nutritionist, the strength and conditioning, like, could Scott Sinclair, like, get me, like, back to my true fighting weight in a year's time? Like what would I look? Maybe a better way to say this: what would I look like after a year of doing whatever they told me? Now, obviously, I'd be kicking and screaming the entire time. But what would I look like if I did whatever they told me for a year, and they just gave me the food to eat, put me in the weight room? Now, listen, I'd be crying. I'd be tears streaming down my face if he got a hold of me. But sometimes I do kind of wonder, like, what would that be like after a year? I mean, it wouldn't be as good as it is for these players, but it's amazing how quick some of them transform their bodies in just a couple of months. Like the wintertime, when you see these guys last day of high school, they sort of look like high school kids, good athletes, but they sort of look like high school kids. And then you see them, like 2 months later, they look like professional wrestlers. It's just crazy how much that changes. Chad Buchanan giving you the go for 2 and 22. Chad Lee, you'd love to see that. Let me go to DawgNation.com. Gosh, I got laid fast again here. Let me go to DawgNation.com, and we'll kind of roll through a few of these. Johnny Surf Dog said AD should have stayed off it for a month instead of constantly trying to run on it and never allowing it to heal properly. Maybe that's the case. I'm not medically sound enough to know the answer to that, but I think it's one of those things where I think you only know it's bad when you try to run on it, I think, but I'm not sure. Bill Russell says, what needs to happen for the Bahamas Bowl to have an SEC tie-in? That's a great question, because here's the thing I believe, is that the bowls that are at the bottom of the bowl pecking order are actually better than the bowls that are at the middle of the pecking order. Do you ever notice this? Like, the bottom bowls are Bahamas Bowl and Las Vegas Bowl. Even like the New Mexico Bowl sounds like it'd be kind of a cool thing to do. Like some of these like really bad bowls that are like pre-Christmas are actually in like amazingly fun locations. Whereas like the middle tier bowls, it's like you're going to go back to Jacksonville the 9 millionth time or something like that. So I'm absolutely of the belief that, I mean, I shudder to think about this, but one day Georgia's not going to be good again. I mean, if we live long enough, we will see Georgia not be good again at some point in time. And when they're not, it's like, what bowl do you want to go to? Do you want to go, dragging back to Tampa for that game? No disrespect to Tampa. Or do you want to go play in the Bahamas? I'll go play in the Bahamas. I'll go play Western Kentucky in the Bahamas Bowl because it seems like Western Kentucky plays in that Bahamas Bowl about every year. I'll go play in the Las Vegas Bowl. That sounds awesome to me. I'm always kind of fascinated by how like those bottom tier bowls, like the first bowls, are always like really cool places. I always think that's kind of interesting. BA's listening face says it's hard to fathom me more ripped. That's funny. Randy Hall asking how to eat a what he calls a soggy mater sandwich. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not really big on sandwiches, to be honest with you. I pretty much eat the same thing for lunch every single day. Randy Hall says, where are we going to be on Friday night? Huge game on Friday. Buford hosting Walton. What a major matchup that's going to be in the 7A playoffs. Great to have 7A back on Friday again, by the way, after last week being on Saturday. And a massive showdown between Buford and Walton. It's going to be amazing. Randy Hall also asking if there's any events coming up at Marlowe's Tavern. Randy, you never know. And that's all I'm going to say right now. But take that as a pretty big hint. You never know. Deidre Frazier says, if Kirby says somebody could have gone back in the game, I'm just going to assume he's out for the season. Oh, my gosh, you better believe that. I mean, if Kirby says, yeah, we think he's going to be fine, he could have gone back in, there's a chance that guy may get medically disqualified. Like, he may never play again. Like, that's like the worst thing Kirby could ever say is, yeah, we think he could have gone back in. I mean, that's as bad as it gets right there. That's really funny, but it's about right. It's about right. Oh, Randy's going to be at the Buford game. That's awesome, Randy. I can't wait to see you. West GA Dog Fan says, I wish that about some of the high school strength and conditioning programs today. Wish I had the opportunities that high school football programs have today. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you one of the things that is going on now is, Gainesville, the Red Elephants, Gainesville, Georgia. Gainesville High School feeds their players 3 meals a day. And, here's what I think is interesting about that, is that, a lot of, really good athletes I knew in high school ate nothing but junk food all the time. And they were in good shape because they were young, and they were good athletes because they were athletic. But they weren't nearly as in good a shape as they could have been because they were eating junk food all the time because that's just what kids did back then. Well, I think now people kind of know more about – now, listen, I was eating junk food too, but I wasn't an elite athlete. I was, just barely hanging on. I wore a uniform, but that's about it. But the point is, like a lot of elite athletes, not elite, high-level athletes that I knew. Elite, I didn't really know any elite athletes, I don't think. But high-level athletes could have been even better, but they just ate a bunch of junk food. They just ate a bunch of junk food all the time. So now you've got, these programs that are trying to find a way to feed their players more frequently, because that's really what it comes down to. It's like, for those of you that ever tried to lose weight, you can exercise all you want, but it's actually, your nutritional intake that determines a lot of what your body's going to look like. So it's the same thing for these high school kids too. It's like they have much better strength and conditioning programs, access to better weight rooms. But if you really want to look the best you can possibly look, it's what you eat that's going to matter. Getting enough fuel in the form of protein, avoiding enough of the junk that you give your body to do what it needs to do, and all of a sudden now the financial resources are in place for some of these teams to be able to do that. So I mean it's impressive to be able to see. All right, final comments. Herb Hamilton says, with so many young guys playing, any ideas on red shirts for this year? I don't. Maybe I should. But at a place like Georgia, they're not really looking to redshirt. Like, who redshirts is Wake Forest. And I'm not being funny. I'm being serious. Like, Wake Forest's goal is to give everybody that year, stockpile them, and then they want to have a bunch of fifth-year guys playing for them. That's just kind of the pathway they've always kind of – Jim Grobe is that way. They're kind of that way now. They kind of like, stockpiling players, letting them get an extra year in the program, and then they hope for some fifth-year guys to succeed with. In a place like Georgia, that's just not going to be the case. I mean, Georgia will burn through red shirts just like that. So are there some obvious red shirt candidates? There might be. I honestly, I'm not familiar enough with the actual participation chart to know. Maybe I should be. But at a place like Georgia, they're not really seeking red shirt years for very many of the guys they sign, because the theory is, if they're not playing a ton, they're going to leave anyway. Or if they're really good, they're going to go to the NFL for 3 years. That being a player at Georgia, either for a good reason or a not so good reason, is sort of a short-term proposition. And Johnny Surfdog says, we are stockpiling 25-year quarterbacks at Georgia, which is true in the case of Stetson Bennett. Spike Squad BC says, will I be taking my scarf to Kentucky? I will be. I love it. Everybody always says it looks like a tech scarf or something like that, but I tell these Georgia fans, y'all got to get used to these college football playoff color schemes, because that championship gold is going to be around here for a while, I believe. So you got to get used to that. Kenneth Herron says how you feel has a lot to do with your intake there, too. You better believe that's the case. I'm always trying to, like my son's in the 5th grade, I'm always trying to like feed him a bunch of protein, stuff like that, because I can't have him pouting around all the time. Not that he does, but I'm saying, it's like I'm trying to keep my kids in a good, happy mood, so keeping them well fed to do so is important for me. Carter Evans says he's going to change his name to B.A. Scarf. That's really funny. That's funny. Cousin Eddie says, I started training again at 49, and it took me to age 52 to get a full six-pack at around 13% body fat. That's actually really impressive. Dieting is the key, and training consistently is a must. That's really pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. Like, unfortunately, and this is where I probably am my own worst enemy, like my only real goal is to just not be as fat as I used to be. Like, in other words, like I will never be a thing of beauty with my shirt off, but I just try to keep my shirt on. Like, I just don't want to be fat. Like, actually being kind of as rocked up as some of y'all are, I don't even really aspire to that. I probably should, but I just don't want to be fat. Like, I'll sort of just take not fat and keep my clothes on for the most part. Bill Coon says, I have a LSU ticket holder friend not making the trip. He's selling me SEC championship tickets for face value. I already bought parking. Go Dogs. Bill, it sounds like you're getting a pretty good deal. That's good. Beer Cans and Batty says you're going to have multiple national title scarves for your collection this year. That is true, although this year's title game is in L.A. So the odds are, you got the scarf and like the cold weather gear in Indianapolis because it was cold. In L.A., you'll probably get something a little bit more befitting their climate, probably. Thomas Van Sant already ran 5 miles today. That's really good, Thomas. Good job there on that. All right, now, final comments. Back on Facebook for a second. Bill Sanders says, when someone says they need to get in shape, I remind them that round is a shape. Bill, that's very funny. Barry Watkins says, I started at 50. I'm 52 now. He says, I'm definitely getting there, but it's been hard. Yeah, but it's really inspiring to know, and I mean this in sincerity, that listen, like 50s is not too late. Like 50s is absolutely a time in which people can be in the best shape they've been in, which is great to hear. I think that's great. Toby Redster says I just redshirted his six-pack. That's about right. That's about right. Oren Chili says I gave up looking good at the beach years ago. Plus, here's the thing. It's like, if you're tan, even it's like the old line, if you can't tone it, tan it. I mean, that's kind of like my deal here. It's like if you're tan, even if you're a little pudgy, honestly, people will forgive that. Even fat looks better when it's tan. Everybody knows that. Derek Greason says, can we get pictures of BA looking like Chaz Chambliss? Chaz was about like the most rocked out high school guy I've seen. And I guess you'd say, what about Branson Robinson? Maybe that's the case. But to me, like Chambliss had this muscular definition. Like that was, I don't know if that was like just, God-given, genes, or if, he like worked for that or what. I mean, I'm sure he had to work obviously a lot for it. But his muscular definition as a high school kid was pretty remarkable. Kevin Krink says, I've got a 1-pack. I drank the other 5. That's actually very funny. That's very funny. Barry Davis says, every great mechanic needs a proper shed over his tools. I like that there as well. Lucy Bowers Boykin also agrees that tan makes everything look better. Yeah. Like, so when I get older, I can already tell you right now, and I'm going to be doing the show, I'm going to be wrinkled as can be. I mean, there's just no hope for that. I've sort of given up on it. When I get to be, like even in a couple of years, I'm probably going to be a good bit, more wrinkled, because I just like being outside. I like to play golf. I like to go to the pool. I like to, be on the beach, take these cruises. I mean, I just like to be outside a lot. I'm going to be wrinkled. That's just all you need to know. That's all you need to know. That's going to happen. Rambo says my muscles are well padded for shipping purposes. That's good, Rambo. I like that too. Really good stuff. All right. Thanks for being here. By the way, Randy also mentioning a bunch of player names. Did y'all see that video I'll finish with this because we got to go. That John Calipari video yesterday where he was like making a plea to Kentucky fans about, being patient for the Michigan State game, but he was like wearing a T-shirt that had the Kentucky recruiting class, their names on the T-shirt, which is kind of a first for me, which I don't know, man. That's a tough sell. Calipari to me is a tough sell. He's a little bit like the Jimbo Fisher of basketball to me right now. Touting these recruits, but winning, very little of consequence come March. But that was kind of funny yesterday. Like Calipari's doing this video talking about a game, not referencing the T-shirt that he's wearing, but if you look at the comments to the video, it's nothing but people like, guffawing with the fact that his T-shirt was like whatever the names were of all the guys that Kentucky's about to sign in this year's class. It was pretty funny. It's pretty funny. All right, we got to go. Thanks for being here. Check out the AJC online. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. You can get all of your news there. Senate runoff coming up. Falcons trying to get back after it again and the mess that is the NFC South. They've kind of given some games away here as of late. Hawks, though, playing better. How about this? Quite a start to the season for them. Michael Harris wins the National League Rookie of the Year. That's good news. Read more about that, ajc.com, so check all of that out there. Also, our friends at RS Andrews, online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Freezing cold. So get that heating system ready to go for the winter that's on its way. Get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. rsandrews.com for more on that. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.